It's over 9,000!
Greetings, Super Elite Warriors, and welcome to Final Forum, the podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball-oween, kind of. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force, on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time, and I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
This is the Bekinney.
And yes, this is our Dragon Ball-oween. We are veering off of Dragon Ball itself specifically, and taking a break from our usual breaking down of the culture and the significance and the writing and et cetera of Dragon Ball to embrace spoopy season. It's my favorite time of year, as I mentioned on my mini-sode. I also mentioned I didn't know if it was Bekinney's favorite time of year.
Definitely.
But if not, we could do like an 8 crazy days of Hanukkah podcast, if that's more your speed.
I mean, if
Space
that's
Hanukkah.
What the people want. Yeah, if that's what the people want.
But so we're here, and instead of, you can only do scariest Dragon Ball things so often. And so our idea was to embrace the other times that Dragon Ball co-creators have worked on other things and appeared in quote-unquote costume as other creators of things. And today we are stretching that concept immediately to its absolute limit.
It's like an old rubber band. It's already breaking down. You can tell it's not going to handle the strain well.
And we're talking about a Godzilla movie. We're going to do a Godzilla movie commentary, and because we're doing that, we have invited some friends on, and we're going to call them on our scouters right now. And with us today, we have the hosts, the co-hosts, the dynamic duo of the Kaiju Transmissions Podcast, sitting to our virtual left. He hails from what I understand is pronounced Michigan. It is the one, the only Kyle Byrd.
Thank you for having me. I have, in my lifetime, probably watched about 50 to 60 minutes of Dragon Ball content.
That's what we like to hear.
I mean, really, when you think of all the big moments, is that you don't really need much more than that, right?
In Bekinney's life, he has watched 50 to 60 minutes worth of Godzilla content, so...
That's about a fair
There you
trade.
go.
So we've got an interesting crossover. And to our virtual south, we have our first repeat guest on Final Forum. You know him as the other co-host of Kaiju Transmissions. You may recognize his voice from our Uzaru episode. It is Matt Parmley.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Really, really happy to be back. Although, for me to be your first repeat guest, I mean, you guys could certainly do better, I'm sure.
I'll be honest, for the first few episodes, I thought I was the guest.
Just just going to put this out there. If in the middle of me talking, I suddenly go dark for a minute, it's because I'm muting my mic. I contracted a space virus out here in the dark reaches
It's really
of space.
quite an issue. Which
and-
is shocking when you think when we're out in the middle of space, that's definitely inside a safe buffer from everyone else.
If you would just socially distance from me ever.
I
No,
thought the
yeah.
Freezer Force had like space medicine. Isn't that supposed to be better than?
Well, we tried to put him in an isolation tank, but he's mostly what I would call jam, so it didn't work out too well.
So I'm feeling much better. So we're gonna soldier on so that we can produce some quality content for our listeners. Today we are taking a look at a movie from the Godzilla franchise, and the reason we are doing it here is not at all because I am a huge Godzilla fan and I wanted an excuse to look at something Godzilla for this podcast, but it's because Akira Toriyama actually makes a very brief cameo as an extra in this film. And this is the 1984 film, The Return of Godzilla. We are going to watch the Japanese version. So for those of you out there who have this version on home video, if you have a Blu-ray or DVD of this movie, you more than likely have this version of the movie. The US version has only ever been released on VHS. If you are seeking this version out elsewhere, I won't say specifically where you could find it. Internet Archive. Oh, sorry about that. And we are queued up. We have, those of us who have the Blu-ray have hit the play button on the menu. We are queued up at exactly 1 second on the screen because every version of this I've seen out in the high seas of the internet, as it were. It seems to be a rip of this Blu-ray. There's no like home video logos once you hit the play button on this Blu-ray. It doesn't have like a Kraken Releasing, which is the company that put this out, thing in front of it. So we're going to hit the play button. I'll count us in. I'll hit 3, 2, 1, go. When on go, everyone hit play. We'll get underway. We'll probably do a little bit of, how I first saw this movie type of thing. And then we'll kind of tear into, we got a whole bunch of notes to get through on this one. Does that sound good to everyone? Everyone got their remotes all woken up and everything?
Yeah. No,
Yes,
have you
sir.
guys talked about the cameos from different kaiju on
Yes.
in Dragon Ball at all?
Yes. So we've talked
Yeah,
about...
Baragon and
We have not talked about any of the culture in the show on this podcast about the culture.
No,
of the
I
show.
mean like they have cameos on Dragon Ball.
Yeah. We've talked about Gamera. We did a lengthy discussion about that. He shows up in one of the episodes. We talked about when Matt was on with us.
References.
When Matt was on with us, Byrd, you probably should have listened to that episode since it was your co-host. Shade. But
He doesn't listen to anything I'm on.
we did a whole
That's
bunch of
true.
discussion about how King Kong was heavily influential in Japanese cinema and in creating Godzilla and influencing Toriyama into creating the great ape form for Goku. And so we talked about King Kong Escapes. I've mentioned Ultraman and Ultra Q multiple times, so I make a point to mention it on almost every episode. That was
I think Baragon and Ghidorah wound up in some episodes of one of the.
I think they're like
They got it covered.
first
They've covered all that stuff, and like the Ultra 7 design outfit used for Chi Chi when she it's
Oh yeah, even I know what you're talking about.
yeah.
they're good. They're good.
So if everyone's got their remotes queued up, on go, hit play, and we'll get rolling. Ready?
Ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. So this, before we get into our notes, this was actually one of the first Godzilla movies I saw. Not first. I was more familiar. I think a lot of people our age, and we're all about the same age, more familiar with the hero Godzilla of the late 60s and early 70s. So before this, I had seen like Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, Godzilla versus Gigan, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. I definitely thought of Godzilla as the good guy and the hero. This was the first movie I ever saw where he was not the good guy, where he was pretty explicitly the bad guy. And I was probably 6-year-old, did not understand that concept at all. And I assumed the people in this movie were the bad guys. And Godzilla was just lost and confused the whole time. And so when they were attacking him, I would be very sad and upset. And I'm like, they're just jerks. So that's my sort of history with this. This is one of the earliest Godzilla movies I ever saw.
Yeah, I think it's Byrd, but I know it was mine. And this is what made me into a fan. It also scared the crap out of me. I think
this is not what made me into a fan.
But this is the movie that I remember. I probably have the most vivid childhood memories of actually this movie. And back when VHS tapes were a thing, I don't know if you guys have those in space, but we have them here. And I used to beg my dad to go rent it, and then like beg my grandma to watch it with me over and over. It's one of those things where like your kid wants to watch the same thing like 20 times in a day. That was me with this movie.
I had a VHS recording of this, so I would just watch it.
We had the sweet old 2 VCR setup at my my house as a kid, so we only needed to rent movies once. But geez, I don't know. This was probably, I mean, it wasn't the first or second Godzilla movie I saw, but it was probably in my first 5, maybe. I had no trouble, I guess, distinguishing that this was different and that sometimes Godzilla's a good guy and sometimes he's a bad guy depending on the movie. So it didn't send me into any kind of crisis or anything. I don't know. I like this movie. Both the Japanese and the American versions have been accused of being, I guess, kind of dry, and they are, but I don't know. Doesn't bother me. And now it's one of my favorites of the Heisei series of Godzilla movies, which I don't know if your listeners know what that means, but basically the second run of movies that Toho Studios made.
Yeah, I'd be the neophyte of the group. I actually watched the American version of this yesterday, and it was the first time I'd seen the movie. I gotta say, it's the writing for the American version, because I know they switched some stuff up, seemed a little bit, I guess, schizophrenic in some parts for me, but overall, I found the movie pretty enjoyable. As far as like other Godzilla movies I've seen, I saw the old one. Was it in the late 90s there with Matthew Broderick?
Yeah, 98.
Yeah,
that's
that
the
was
Dragon Ball evolution of the Godzilla franchise.
Yeah, I understand. I'm coming in at a low point there, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was okay for what it was. I was younger at the time, so obviously my standards are going to be a little bit lower. But I just watching a big monster stomp through a city and blow stuff up, I thought was pretty cool. But I think one of the things I've noticed with these older films is there's a lot more subtext and a lot more things going on, where Godzilla is not really the main thrust of the theme. He's more just a representation of like chaotic things in the world that are beyond our control, and I actually really enjoy that aspect.
So this is the first Japanese Godzilla movie you've seen, then?
Yeah.
Okay, you should watch the original. I'm sure you've been told that, but the 1954 movie is.
I'm actually going to be really interested to see or to hear Bekinney's reaction comparing the two cuts, because they're so drastically different.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that some of my questions from the other version get answered in this one. So I will definitely be pointing out things.
If you watch the American cut and you're like, that didn't make sense, I don't understand this, the Japanese cut will pretty much have you taken care of, I think.
Got it. Perfect. Excellent.
Right. It's interesting though. It's funny though that you watched the American version first, because that is how pretty much everyone kind of came to this movie if you saw this movie before, like 2016, when the Japanese version finally came on home video.
I mean, yeah, I think this was, I think of all the Japanese cuts, this was the one that took the longest to make it here, for sure.
Yeah. So the Return of Godzilla, aka Godzilla 1984, aka later on in its American release, Godzilla 1985, aka Godzilla. Yes, this is the second of ultimately 4 movies that were released with the title in Japan of just Godzilla. So if anyone ever asks you to name 4 Godzilla movies, you could say Godzilla, 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 and Godzilla.
Halloween's almost there.
The movie was released December 15th, 1984, with a budget of approximately $6 million American equivalent dollars and earned approximately $14 million American equivalent dollars. So it was overall a moderate success. It opened at number 3 in Japan behind Ghostbusters and Gremlins in what newspapers called the Year of G, and was one of the most successful domestic movies of 1984 for Toho. It actually, I think it was the second most successful domestic film in Japan. By the way, this scene is like one of the best horror sequences in a Godzilla movie.
I love this scene, yeah.
Where-
And it's cut worse in the American version. The Japanese version, you see more of this sea louse that's attacking him, and you see more of like the mummified bodies. And
Yeah, I was gonna say the pacing on this, the American version, was way different.
Yeah, it's I think that was an attempt to make it a little more,
American.
audiences in America thought of Godzilla as being certainly sillier, and probably they probably thought people would be taking their kids to see this, and they wouldn't want to see, a giant sea louse sucking people's bodies dry and, irradiated bodies all over the place.
Well, they underestimated the interest in that, because I'm loving it.
Yeah, this version is it's more of a slow burn, and it's a lot moodier. This is a great horror scene. I don't know if I would call this movie a horror movie, but it has the atmosphere of a horror movie, which I think is something I really like about it.
Yeah. It's another reason I thought it would be fitting for this October month. But the movie is directed by Koji Hashimoto with a screenplay by Shuichi Nagahara. It's produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, who produced the original Godzilla movie in 1954. And it's scored by Reijiro Kuroku. I'm probably butchering those pronunciations a little bit. The effects sequences were handled by Teruyushi Nakano. And this is the first film in what would become known as the Heisei era of Godzilla films, which we talked about once before on the podcast, the difference between the Showa era and the Heisei era because of Toriyama's approach to those two eras. He's more into Showa era filmmaking and storytelling especially. He likes brighter things, more colorful characters, more fantastical stuff, and that's why Dragon Ball is the way it is. This is a more serious style of storytelling in the Heisei era, and it's marked by more serious, more serialized, where there's actual sequels instead of each thing just kind of being an adventure that just sort of happens. And even though this movie technically takes place in the Showa era, it is considered by Toho to be part of the Heisei era. I think what did this happen, like a year or two before the Heisei era officially started? Yep. But so after the box office failure of the 1970s Godzilla movies, and that's specifically and especially the last one, which was Terror of Mechagodzilla in 1975, Toho was still trying to develop projects because they were still making money off of Godzilla merchandise, because Godzilla sells to kids, and so toys sell to kids. American fans got to see Godzilla in Marvel Comics and the Hanna-Barbera animated series. UPA, which is like United Pictures Association or something like that, tried and failed to get interest for multiple Japanese co-productions with Toho, including a color remake of the original. They wanted to do Godzilla vs. Gargantua, Godzilla vs. the Devil. There was all these concepts that were flying around, and just none of them ever got off the ground. In 1980, Toho signed a deal with Disney to distribute Disney films in Japan. That's big for Akira Toriyama, who loved Disney. This includes, though, re-releasing many of their animated classics theatrically, and this gave Toho then the idea to re-release Godzilla classics, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, etc. These re-releases did well enough, and Tomoyuki Tanaka decided, hey, let's take a serious attempt to bring Godzilla back. There was an attempt to bring Godzilla back for the 25th anniversary of the original film and tie something new into the 3 Mile Island accident, which, if you don't know what that is, in 1979, there was a partial meltdown of a nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania in March, and it was international news. It was actually took like 15 or 14 years and $2 billion to ultimately clean up. The cleanup duties were finalized in like late 1993. Tanaka, encouraged by the success of King Kong, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and The Thing remakes, as well as Alien being a hit in 1979, notice some Toriyama influences in those, he decides he has this vision to bring back adult audiences alienated by the more child-friendly and fantastical approaches taken in the 70s. So a draft script was submitted in 1980 that pitted Godzilla against a shape-shifting kaiju called Bakan or Bagan, which that's a whole can of worms for Godzilla fans.
Yeah.
But the project ultimately never got off the ground.
One thing that I'm reminded of as we were just seeing photos of the Godzilla from 1954 is that this movie doesn't clarify that it's a different Godzilla. It kind of just talks like he's just back. And it's not until a few movies later that Toho decided to kind of be like, no, the Heisei Godzilla and Godzilla 1954 are two different monsters. And here we have the Prime Minister, who is probably my favorite character in this movie. It's a very understated performance, but every emotion that he's going through is worn on his face.
I would agree with that assessment 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, and you haven't even seen
awesome.
like he shines so much more in this version of the movie.
Yeah, he's like a real.
I'm thinking in particular of a scene down the road here a little bit. I won't get into it till we're actually there, but there's a scene where there's a meeting between Japan and America and Russia, and that scene alone, I was sold on this guy.
Yeah, and that actor Keiji Kobayashi, he's not in a lot of Godzilla stuff, but Keiju Kobayashi is in a lot of Koichi Okamoto's movies. He's in the original Submersion of Japan, which if anyone out here listening is a fan of this movie, I would say watch the original Submersion of Japan, because this movie is very much modeled after the kind of disaster movies like that. And you see a lot of that and Prophecies of Nostradamus and The Last War. You see a lot of similarities in this.
Yeah. Kobayashi was in like 200 plus movies in a career that spanned 70 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he's very quiet, and like I said, it's a very understated performance. And so he's not acting as broadly as the other actors, but he's also acting circles around them almost.
This scene as well is also very different in the American version.
Yeah. Oh, there's a scene. There's a scene. As far as differences.
There's a lot of differences, yeah.
But there's one very specific that you'll notice being pretty much the opposite in the American version.
I think I know which scene you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think
it has
Jelly
to do
might
with
have
the-
accidentally spoiled that for me
Yeah.
a while back.
With there's some actor introductions that we're gonna have to make. We're coming up on Yasuke Natsuki, who I think fans would mostly recognize from Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, but he's also the lead in Dogora. He's going to be Professor Hayashida coming up. But he's also a great actor.
Toho veteran.
And I know it's in the notes somewhere, so I don't want to jump the gun. But while we're on the subject, we should mention that Hayashida was supposed to be played by Akihiko Hirata, who played Dr. Serizawa in the original movie, but he passed away shortly before this. So it was kind of a short notice casting change. But
Yeah, and Natsuke even said later in an interview that if he had known the part was Hirata's originally, he actually would not have taken it because he didn't think he was worthy to step into that man's shoes. But Hirata did do publicity for this movie when it was initially announced.
Yep.
He put on the famous Dr. Serizawa eye patch from the original and was involved in a big press release saying Godzilla's back, and that was like everyone's first kind of tease that this was going to be something that was darker and more returning to the roots of the original.
With the production, it's worth mentioning so while Toho is kind of thinking of ways to bring Godzilla back in a serious way, I think that Tanaka, he knew that if he was going to bring Godzilla back, it couldn't be a low budget kind of kids movie. He really wanted it to be a big spectacle that could compete with Hollywood productions and throw a lot of money into it. And I think that's part of why it took so long to get another Godzilla movie made, is that he knew things needed to change and knew it would cost a lot. While he is, trying to find the right story, though, things in America are a little different, as Steve Miner, the director of movies like Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3 and Lake Placid and others, he proposed making a Godzilla movie. He was the first American to get the rights to do an American Godzilla film. And he hired Fred Decker, who made Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps, as the screenwriter. And Toho approved, but it was going to be an independent production, so Miner had to find funding, which he couldn't, and ultimately that led to the movie's demise. There's a lot of really cool stuff about that movie you can find online. You can find the script, you can find pictures of William Stout's Godzilla design, all kinds of things. But the
design
was going to
pretty similar to the Marvel Godzilla in a lot of ways. I've always thought.
William Stout's Godzilla is very dinosaurish looking, like the Marvel Godzilla. That American Godzilla was supposed to be made in 3D. Eventually, there were plans to use stop motion, which got scrapped. And like I said, just lack of being able to find funding kind of put that movie in kind of the graveyard. But elements of Fred Decker's script actually wind up in here. A lot of the kind of American and Soviet tensions are pulled, and also things like the orbit missiles in space, stuff like the anti-nuclear missiles being shot to kind of knock Godzilla out and neutralize him for a bit. Even Godzilla stepping on the bum later. Those are things that are in the Fred Decker script. And speaking of Godzilla veterans. Ishiro Honda was actually approached to direct this, and he said no because he was working with Kurosawa very heavily. He was Kurosawa's assistant and, helped with the scripts and first AD on his last 5 movies, basically keeping Kurosawa. There's no nice way to say this, but Kurosawa was a cantankerous old bastard that was very difficult to work with. No, and Honda was very much the opposite. So he kind of kept him in line. Right here, you see the reporters coming in, and wait, where is he? In a minute, we'll see Shinpei Hayashiya, who is pretty well known in Japan. There he is. He's the guy trying to take pictures. He shows up in a few parts whenever there's reporters. But he directs these days. He directs independent kaiju movies like Reigo and Raiga and Reigo versus Oga. He's also in Japan. He's a very well known rakugoka, and those are basically like comedians. Only that's the closest thing I can think of to compare them to. Basically, they're storytellers. But you go see one because they're often funny stories with a lot of characters and things. Anyway, we'll run into him basically anytime there's reporters. Anyway, Ishiro Honda turned the movie down, and even if he wasn't with Kurosawa, I'm not sure if he would have taken the job anyway. He really felt at this point that Godzilla was not really his anymore, and kind of felt, that he'd kind of probably said all he wanted to say with Godzilla. But Koji Hashimoto, he started with Toho in 1962. He was an assistant director on King Kong versus Godzilla. He worked on 5 of Ishiro Honda's movies throughout the 60s, and he remained an AD with Toho through the 70s. He worked on some Kurosawa films and some higher budget Japanese films. Right before this, he did Sayonara Jupiter, which is not not as good as this, but visually it's interesting looking, I guess. But it's not a good movie. These would be his only 2 directing efforts. He ended up kind of deciding in his life that he would rather produce and do other things besides direct.
Yeah, the Japanese film industry was still reeling from the rise of television and home video markets, and the 80s were still, this is early 80s, so they were still trying to climb out of uncertainty. I mean, Daiei had shuttered at this point, and there was a lot of uncertainty, so he wanted to step aside from directing and kind of spearhead with production so he could sort of guarantee successes a little bit more and keep his job and keep the doors open and the lights on.
Yeah.
This is another great tension building scene. I definitely wouldn't call this one a horror scene at all, but this is a great tense build up.
Yeah, it's also the first time you really hear them talking about global nuclear conflict, right? Godzilla's attacking the sub, and that kind of leads to why would Hashimoto want to bring back Godzilla now? Why make another Godzilla movie? And why would you want to return Godzilla to the more darker tone of the first film, right? Because the series, as it progressed, it became much more kidified, much more able to be promoted towards children, much more silly. But the answer that he came up with was the Cold War. And unfortunately, if you look at like what's going on in the world around us, this movie is like almost speaking into our current time. And the nuclear tensions were incredibly high worldwide, and perhaps nowhere more so than Japan, which it actually has a unique place in Asia because it was an American ally. It has American military bases, and it was actually geographically near Soviet territory. They felt caught in the middle. And we mentioned on the podcast before how much of Japanese cinema in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was incredibly influenced by the tensions around Korea and Vietnam. And how movies like The Last War, which is, by the way, an incredible movie, you should definitely check it out, were created out of the unique Japanese perspective around the global issues. And like The Last War, I mean, it deals with nuclear apocalypse and Armageddon. That movie is so heart-wrenching and just really, really well put together. I think that it perfectly encapsulates the fear of the early part of the Cold War. This would be a great complementarian film to that. And then Hashimoto, of course, felt that that Japan would have a unique and interesting things to say about the Cold War. And so as we go through the film, we're going to make sure that we point out what these perspectives are. And most of them are going to be obvious, but it provides some of the film's more interesting directorial choices. And as far as Hashimoto's work on the movie goes, we're also going to point out the most prominent changes from the Japanese release to the compared to the American version.
Blows my mind that, here we are in 2022 and a lot of the things that happen in this movie in a lot of ways are still relevant. And you got Toho like forcing mandates on people to not make Godzilla when they're making new Godzilla movies, to specifically not reference nuclear tensions and things like that. And we sort of recently found out that they told Hideaki Anno when he was doing Shin Godzilla to not make Godzilla a nuclear allegory. And
he was pretty much like, no.
Rightfully so.
And it just blows my mind, though, that they're like, this character that was created because of that, and then 30 years later we made a movie that was still relevant in that sphere, and you could probably make a movie that's very similar to this one today, where you could have like Godzilla attack like an aircraft carrier or something and have international tensions be sort of on the rise, and they're like, don't do any of that.
Yeah, I wonder. There's Shinpei Hayashi again. You have to just. I mean, look at how aggressive their approach to merchandising and branding Godzilla is right now, and you really have to wonder if they're just trying to make sure nobody can get offended, or basically making sure Godzilla can go down as smooth as possible for everybody.
Yeah, I think it sort of saddens me that the character that tackled most directly with the first film, Nuclear Armageddon, and everything about the destruction of two cities in Japan by the atomic bombs, like we could use that story again right now, and like Toho they don't want anything to do with it, and like we desperately need that kind of storytelling today.
Godzilla's making everyone crazy.
Always.
And he's ratcheting up international tensions. So a lot like the original Godzilla film and a lot of other foreign films that get released for Americans over time, and even Dragon Ball itself, there's in fact a unique American version, which we were kind of referencing earlier. And that's how I think we all said that's how we were all sort of first exposed to this movie. But even without all of the major changes that are present in that movie, there are some subtle edits to the dialogue or shot composition in that movie that give it a unique flavor. And it's kind of like the speech that Goku gives to Frieza on Namek when he's in his Super Saiyan form. In the original Japanese, Goku says something like, "I am a Saiyan warrior who came from Earth, a warrior of rage, but with a calm heart. I am the legendary Super Saiyan God." But for the American version, they kind of oomphed it up a little bit and made him more of a paragon, like Superman, where he says, "I am the hope of the universe, the answer to all living things that cry out for peace. I am the protector of the innocents, light in the darkness, ally to good, nightmare to you. Bullshit propaganda. They're the same. They're essentially saying the same thing, but like the tone is so radically different in the Americanized version.
Yeah, and that happens in this movie a lot.
I've already seen like half a dozen things that are just tonally way different in this version.
And if you have the subtitles on, I mean, you can see that the more political discussions are way more complex,
way more nuanced.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, the American version is much more like, boy, these Soviets just want to shoot nukes at everything.
Yeah, it's very, very propagandized. Released in the United States theatrically on August 23rd, 1985, Godzilla 1985, which, as we've said, is the American version, takes the 103 minutes of Return of Godzilla, which is the Japanese version that we're watching now, adds a few minutes of American actor Raymond Burr reprising his role from the Americanized version of the original Godzilla movie, and then cuts the entire thing down to 87 minutes, which really messes with the pacing. Meaning there's like a solid 20 to 30 minutes of original Japanese shot footage that just gets cut and we never see it. Notably deleted are some effects shots that vary in quality from just downright bad to actually really good and well done. And they're taken out for seemingly no reason, and any and all implications that America may have been just as aggressively suggesting the use of nuclear force in the Japanese version kind of gets massaged a little bit in the American version. But yeah, as like we said before, as we move through this movie, we'll point out some of the major differences. And like I've said, even just the opening scene, tonally hugely different and much improved.
We're about to get our first peek at the new Godzilla.
Yes, we are.
In a really
this
great.
sequence is awesome.
This is an awesome sequence. This is the first time in any Godzilla movie. I like the build
up with the birds.
And this is the first time in any Godzilla movie you really see this top down sort of Godzilla's eye view of what the world kind of looks like. It's a really, really kind of inspired and unique and interesting shot.
This is a good time to mention that Teruyoshi Nakano, I mean, this is him making a Godzilla movie with the budget that he always wanted. And, I mean, this is the last movie he would be the special effects director for, but, I mean, what a way to go out.
He said this was like I think, because his first one that he ever worked on was King Kong versus Godzilla, and I think for him that probably was his favorite. He often said, though, this was his second favorite set to ever have been on.
Well, I mean, being in his place, you know, making those 70s movies with, you know, $5 and then being given what is still one of the most expensive Japanese Godzilla movies. I mean, I imagine this is just him doing so many shots and things that he probably always wanted to do and just wasn't able to.
Yeah, he's got like the reverse story of Koichi Kawakita, right? Where
right.
He starts with like no budget and then finally gets to do a real budget. And Kawakita, meanwhile, gets like his, hey, here's a bunch of money, go do anything you want. And Godzilla vs. Biollante has, you know, some of the most effects footage ever that was left on the cutting room floor because they got to do a lot of stuff and got to experiment and try things. And then by the end, Kawakita was like, it was like, hey, here's like $20 and 15 minutes. Go make some Godzilla stuff.
And Nakano, you know, he just passed away. So, I mean, watching this now is, you know, it's a good celebration of just, you know, his work. And even some of the shots in here that we'll have to point out are stock footage from some other movies he worked on, like Submersion of Japan and Prophecies of Nostradamus. And I mean, they're really great, which is why they blend into a movie like this made, you know, so much later.
Yeah, it's mind blowing how good the effects on those two movies were. That they're dropped into a movie 10 years later, and unless you know what you're looking for, you can't tell.
Yeah. Yeah, the American version sadly really kind of cuts this movie to ribbons in an effort to I mean, I get, American audiences need quicker pacing, and the Japanese movie, it's a slow burn, and the pacing isn't always great, but I will sacrifice fast pacing for a better movie any day. And and a lot of the things, we'll talk about it when it happens, but a lot of the undercurrents of the American version really kind of, this side of Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 2019 movie, really kind of fuck up the whole thematic point of Godzilla in several ways. And but due to some of those changes for the American version, specifically parts of the score being lifted from DEFCON 4, Christopher Young, putting music by Christopher Young for that movie into Godzilla 1985. That's kind of what's held up its home video rights. And if you've heard anyone who works for a home video label or something, music, if you want to know why something has never made the jump to DVD or even Blu-ray, sometimes it's usually music rights. For just you really got to make sure you clear everything with every party involved, with every aspect of the production, and make sure anyone who needs to be getting paid is getting paid. And especially with music that is put in, especially music from other things, sometimes that just leads to a dead end. And that's where Godzilla 85 is now. Yeah, it's caused some confusion because that's the version everyone grew up with, and this is the version that is available now. It's literally
it's a great
traded
shot
places.
Of Byrd feeding on internet cringe.
This is by the way, the first time that Godzilla feeds on radiation. It doesn't happen.
A lot of people think of Godzilla as a creature that's always consumed radiation, but that didn't come along until this movie.
I also just want to say really quick, I love the big goofy head, especially when they do the close-ups.
Yeah.
We got some notes about that later on.
I know we do.
But yeah, the American version threw in another $2 to $3 million. And the box office take-in here in the States was a little over 4. So theatrically, it really was kind of a dud. However, as we've talked about, renting this and seeing it, video stores, the movie ended up being very profitable, but due to home video rentals and things like that, it ended up being one of New World's more profitable movies, but not theatrically. And it was the last Japanese Godzilla movie to get a wide theatrical release here in the States until Godzilla 2000, which was 15 years later. And that is still the last one to get a wide theatrical release. Shin Godzilla got a limited run and did very well, but it was a limited run. There's the stuff from Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers, but those aren't, those are American films.
And here we have these characters talking about Godzilla being similar to birds almost 10 years before Jurassic Park sort of introduced the world to the concept that dinosaurs and birds were evolutionarily similar.
Yeah. I think paleontology nerds knew that.
For sure.
As far as pop culture, yeah, that wasn't quite known.
Right.
Should we mention that the lead reporter, Goro Maki, is there's 3 Goro Makis in Godzilla. The son of Godzilla, and then there's this Goro Maki, and then Shin Godzilla has a Goro Maki as well.
And they're completely unrelated. It just happens to be a name that's wildly popular with Godzilla directors in Japan for some reason.
It's one of the
Always for a
mysteries of,
reporter,
the world.
almost, right?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, the Shin Godzilla one wasn't a reporter. The other two were, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. Hiroshi Koizumi just showed up.
Yes,
We like him.
Another longtime Toho veteran. So tap for the score, and the score for this movie is awesome, by the way. This is one of the most unique Godzilla scores that there is. It's got
I love it.
A great atmospheric element to it. It sounds like very few of the others because so many of those were done by Jun Fukuda or Akira Ifukube. You
mean Sato? You said Fukuda.
Oh, did I meant Sato instead of Fukuda. Why did I say
it's
Fukuda?
Okay. I messed up a name earlier, but I won't say whose it was. So
I have COVID brain. But yes, Masaru Sato did, a lot of the 60s and 70s Godzilla movies that were fun and poppy, and Ifukube did a lot of the more serious entries, and here comes Kuroku doing a more serious entry, and his compositions are just so different from Ifukube's. They have just a less militaristic feel. They're less bombastic and I don't want to say Ifukube's music is necessarily upbeat, but they have that sort of you can march to them kind of thing to it. Whereas this is more, I don't know, more symphonic. I don't know a ton about music.
It's moody.
Moody and atmospheric. Kuroku, for his part, he was a child of the 40s and 50s. He was born, a couple years after World War II ended. And he grew up in a Japan that was being rebuilt and concerned about... He was often concerned about where his next meal was going to come from. He grew up fairly poor, but he was interested in music, specifically symphonic music, from when he first heard it because it was an escape from his life. He was ultimately a student of Koichi Sugiyama, who Dragon Ball fans might know because he's the composer of the Dragon Quest video games, which Toriyama did the character designs for. Sugiyama is one of the more prolific composers in Japan, having scored Godzilla movies and Ultraman shows and Gatchaman and the Dragon Quest games. And he was also a complicated, arguably outright bad person who was a World War II atrocity denier and a promoter of Japanese nationalism. But
fun.
But Kuroku, based on the interview I saw with him on Kaiju Masterclass, which I'll plug a little bit again in a moment here, did not seem to necessarily espouse his senpai's viewpoints as much as just take after him musically. And Kuroku, for his part, though, wound up doing a bunch of video games also, but he worked mostly in television. And The Return of Godzilla is his lonely sort of theatrical film credit. If you want to learn more about this guy, the online kaiju convention, Kaiju Masterclass, did a full 90-minute interview with him. It was his first and to date only ever English language interview. It covered his career from his short credit on a gritty depiction of the of the atomic bombings called Picadon through what he's doing as of late 2021. It's a really comprehensive interview and peek into who this guy was, his philosophy when it came to scoring movies, and his career. So you can find that on YouTube by looking for Kaiju Masterclass.
Do it. Did you mention what Ifukube said when he declined the offer to score this?
Was this the one, or was it the next one where he said like you can do it as long as you don't use any?
That was Biollante.
Yeah,
and they were like, if as long as you don't like mess with my music, it's fine. And then they just went insane and.
The electric guitar solo.
Yeah, the electric guitar version. And he was like, for the love of God, I'll just come back.
It's the most 80s thing, 80s guitar solo for a Godzilla film. I mean, like, you can just,
it was either his daughter or his granddaughter that was like, what? Just do it, because they're going to use your music anyway. And he was like, fine. But his response to getting offered this was very bizarre. Because I guess they had told him, pay. I know I'm talking about something completely different. But for those watching at home, like I said, pay very close attention to the Prime Minister in this scene, with where he's literally sitting between
And the shot
American...
compositions.
Yes.
Oh, the shot composition is fantastic.
Right here, this part right here is completely edited out of the American version, where you've got the side of his face, and you could hear one ear, or you see one ear, and you've got the American talking, and then reverse shot, and it's the Soviet talking, and this is a really spectacular direction by Hashimoto, and this is completely wiped out. Not completely, but it's wiped out of the American version of the movie, and I think it's such a brilliant shot composition of just that Americans in one ear, Soviets in the other ear, Americans on one side, Soviets on the other side.
I mean, the look on his face just says everything. He's literally just listening to these two superpowers yell about how nuclear weapons are the only solution, and he's just got this.
And not just that nuclear weapons are the only solution, but you have to let us drop a nuke on Japan.
Yeah, and he just
where Godzilla is. Like, what?
Yeah, he just has this, like, Jesus Christ, I can't even look on his face. There it is again. Yeah. Like I said, very understated performance, but brilliant acting. But yes, anyway, I guess somehow they had told Ifukube that Godzilla his size would be 80 meters in this, because, buildings in Japan gotten bigger, and his response was, I don't write music for 80 tall meter monsters. Very bizarre answer.
Kind of an awesome quote, though.
That's oddly specific.
Also, this scene is entirely excised. Essentially,
I was going to say, this is a scene that I have not seen yet.
Yeah,
so
and it's all about just the Japanese perspective of, we cannot allow a nuke on Japanese soil again, ever. We can't allow one to go off. We can't, it just can't happen.
This scene...
It really... Yeah, go ahead.
This little scene here accomplishes what Shin Godzilla more or less spends the entire movie doing. Which is showing the Japanese kind of have this inner discussion about the optics of this situation.
I think what ends up happening in the American version is the Prime Minister loses all agency that he has in this film, which I think is that in the Japanese perspective on the bombings, that's definitely the biggest casualty of the revamp. Where I think some of the decisions on the American version are better, they do cut, and we kind of mentioned it, but there are some effects in this that are not super great. I think cutting those was actually a good decision. And I am personally a proponent of the tighter pacing, but I fully admit, that being my first Godzilla film, I probably do have the nostalgia goggles.
I'm all for the tighter pacing in general as well, but I think taking it out of this specifically, there's a lot taken out a little bit earlier in the movie that, like Bekinney mentioned, this went a lot faster and that went a lot faster, and yeah, that might be a little feel a little rushed in the American version, but I kind of prefer that. All of this stuff in here with the Prime Minister really weighing the balance of power, the effects of allowing nuclear weapons, the effects of not allowing nuclear weapons to be used, where he's talking about, or he's getting advice from his advisors saying we could be left alone diplomatically, we could be ostracized by the Soviets and the Americans, we could be sort of adrift between these two superpowers, and then him getting in front of these ambassadors and saying, if you want to call it egotistical, so be it, but I'm not going to let you nuke my people.
Well, he
losing
mentions
all of this
Japan's-
is a shame.
Well,
Yeah,
he
absolutely.
mentions Japan's 3 nuclear principles, which are: do not make nuclear weapons, do not possess them, and do not allow them into the country. But yeah, I mean, what you get with the faster pacing of the original, you kind of sacrifice.
This is edited out completely. The U.S. nuclear.
Oh yeah, there was no U.S. nukes in the American version.
you sacrifice the heart and soul of the movie.
Right,
Like
'cause-
you legitimately lose the soul of this movie.
Yeah, I'd agree
and
with that
this is
100%.
another great scene where he says, "How did you address the American and Soviet leaders?" And he says, "If you were in my spot and you had 2 countries basically screaming at you to drop nukes on your people, what would you do?" And
I think this is the most powerful movie in the film. Actually, a powerful moment in the film. It's, at least for him, like the sense of dread and decision that he has to make, facing the fact that Godzilla is going to attack his country and still having to stick to his guns and convince 2 nuclear powers to leave him alone. Like that sense of tension is just all over his face.
His performance too, just the minor little shakes that he kind of gives himself, in that moment is excellent. Absolutely excellent stuff.
He's masterfully selling just the level of tension and stress.
Yeah.
oh, this poor bastard.
We'll get there. I want to talk about real quick. So something that is really common with Toho films, they basically employed a 2-director approach in the Return of Godzilla, which means Koji Hashimoto filmed all of the human sequences, and Teruyoshi Nakano basically shot all of the special effects and Godzilla sequences, and the 2 shoots were happening at the same time, basically divorced from one another. And so a brief note on Nakano: he was born in 1935 in Andong, Manchukuo, and I'm butchering these names, so I apologize in advance, which is now actually in China in a city called Liaoning. And his father actually worked on the Manchuria Railway, and his childhood was basically one of privilege and wealth. He first came to Japan at the age of 10 following the end of World War II, and he was separated from his father, who was actually imprisoned as a prisoner of war, a POW. And to escape the newfound hardship, he actually went to theaters often, and he was just really impassioned with cinema. He received his degree in film, and he actually began working at Toho in 1959. The same year that he graduated, and he worked as an assistant director in the 1960s. He found the prospect of being a director, having to convey his ideas to actors who would then interpret them and provide their interpretations back to the director, to be really frustrating, just like the concept of it. But he loved visual storytelling through effects, and he found that way more compelling. And so before long, he actually was singled out by the great Eiji Tsuburaya, Toho's master of special effects. And Tsuburaya worked on the original Godzilla film, Ultraman, did a ton of special effects for the Showa era of Godzilla films, and he became basically a mentee to Tsuburaya. And then in 1969, he actually found himself in the director's chair for special effects because under Tsuburaya's supervision for a film called The Crazy Big Explosion. And if you're familiar with Nakano's work, it's an extremely fitting title. The guy is Mr. Explosion himself. Like everything, like if you ever watch Terror Mechagodzilla, the explosions are the size of Godzilla himself in that movie, and it's glorious.
The number of times he lit the Godzilla suit on fire over the years.
It's a lot of fun. And then with Tsuburaya in and out of the hospital in 1969 and 1970, Nakano actually found himself kind of thrust more into completing his mentor's films. And unfortunately, Tsuburaya passed away in 1970. So once that happened, Nakano actually was able to become the new lead of Toho's special effects department. Probably his crowning achievements in terms of his special effects work: Submersion of Japan from 1973, which we talked about briefly, Prophecies of Nostradamus from 1974. And we mentioned, but like sequences from those films actually appear in other Toho films, and decades later in some cases. So that's how good his special effects work was. And of course, we're going to see some of those very effect scenes in the film we're watching today.
Yeah, Nakano was a dog. He loved to blow stuff up. It was so, not only Terror of Mechagodzilla, but even the original Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the oil refinery sequence in that. If you watch even just that part of the movie, you're like, someone had to have had their skin burned off during this shoot, right? Like, because
it's not a good special effect until somebody almost dies trying to pull it off.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's insane.
I'm surprised like there was anything left of the set after some of the movies that he made.
I remember I've been to 2 conventions that Nakano made a guest appearance at, and I just remember during one of the Q&As, I don't know, someone asked him something about pyrotechnics or something, and he was like, it's really not that hard. You just gotta grab like a fire extinguisher and hook up all this stuff. And he was basically like telling us how to make a bomb.
Which is amazing.
There it is, the goofy head. So Godzilla was redesigned for this movie, as is common for Godzilla movies in general. He gets redesigns all the time. And he was, like we said before, he's resized from 50 meters to 80 meters so that he would not be dwarfed by the newer, taller skyline of the more modern Tokyo of the 80s. Suit construction took 2 months and was built around casts of stuntman Hiroshi Yamawaki, who dropped out shortly before production began and was replaced by veteran Godzilla suit actor Ken Satsuma, who had previously played Hedorah and Gigan in earlier Godzilla movies. Obviously, the suit was not built to his measurements, and so it was bulky. And it also weighed 240 pounds, and it wasn't really well distributed on his frame. So he could typically only do about 10 minutes before he had to be pulled out of the suit. He also asked for a couple of modifications. This really gross one is he wanted holes to be drilled into the tips of Godzilla's fingers so he would be able to have somewhere for his sweat to pour out. Ew.
That's disgusting.
He also, at one point, like got loaded into the suit and was supposed to be like a front shot, so they didn't want to close him in. And he was like, no, close me in because you're going to be like blasting pyrotechnics at me. And they're like, no, we were like, whatever. And he's like, okay. And they didn't close him in, and the explosions like wound up popping all around him, and it ended up throwing metal debris into the back of the suit where you get loaded in from. And then he was stepping on metal debris inside the suit and having it like tear his feet apart.
So inspired by this publicity surrounding the 40-foot tall Kong robot from 1976 King Kong film, which is a whole other debacle, Toho spent almost $500,000 building a nearly 20-foot tall robotic Godzilla dubbed the Cybot, which was used for the close-ups of the creature's head. I love the Cybot. It's so goofy looking. The Cybot was a hydraulically powered metal skeleton covered in urethane skin, which utilized computers and animatronics to tilt the head, move the lips and the arms. Doesn't really match the look of the suit itself, and it tends to stick out, as I pointed out, like when we're doing close-ups versus long shots.
It's a cool looking thing, though. It definitely...
I enjoy it. I mean, obviously, looking from modern day aesthetics, considering the first time I saw this movie was literally yesterday, it looks a little goofy, but I could absolutely see how in the 80s this would have looked fantastic.
I like the how the snout moves on the Cybot. This guy on fire is from Submersion of Japan, I think.
I was gonna say when I saw that yesterday, it looked like he was green screened in for some reason.
Yeah, that's a movie from almost 10 years before this. That shot is from.
I love this is like one of the few Godzilla films, by the way, where Godzilla like vaporizes people and you see it very directly.
So here we have one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, we got to talk about this.
I knew this was coming.
So in the version we're watching here, this character is going, I have to stop this because Godzilla's attack causes the controls for the bomb to accidentally start a countdown to automatically launch the weapon. And he is, this Soviet guy gets battered and thrown around, and he gets his head hit, and he gets knocked unconscious, and he wakes up, and he's like, I have to stop it. I'm the only one who could stop it. I'm the only one left alive. Please let me find the strength to stop it. And as he's going to stop the countdown, his the electrical whatever shorts out, and he gets blown up, and he dies. And a countdown is now on, and it's just running until the nuclear weapon launches on its own. In the American version, this guy gets up and he's like, I'm the only one who can launch the missile. I have to do it. And they show him crawl into the room, and then it cuts to a scene that isn't super obviously inserted, again, unless you know that you're looking for it, of a finger reaching up and pushing a button that then starts the countdown clock. And so it's him, because he's a Soviet, launching the missile. And here's another effect sequence. This is from Prophecies of Nostradamus right here.
Yeah, the chain reaction of the cars blowing up, which is great. I love this. This is stock footage.
I miss old practical effects like this.
I know, right? And right before talking about that incredible chain reaction of explosions, I was going to say, I mean, just let's take a moment to just relish this set. I love this too. I love Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah has a moment like this. Godzilla vs. The Thing has a moment like this. But I love when Godzilla is shown as just being so big and out of his element that he's clumsy and he falls and knocks over things. But yes, this set is just incredible. And it's easily one of my favorites of any of the Godzilla movies.
Yeah, they I love.
We have a very bizarre cameo coming up.
Yes,
I was
yes.
gonna say, this part's awesome.
This is we're going to get a cameo from Hiroshi Komayatsu, who was nicknamed Monsieur in Japan. And he's a singer, guitarist in a couple different Japanese rock. But there he is. And he just has a cameo.
He's like dressed like a priest, and he looks happy about whatever's happening.
This little shot right here is edited out of the Japanese or the American version. I think it's an awesome.
That's a crime.
It's a great shot too.
And it was intended. The reason they put that shot in was as a tribute to Yuji Kaida. And for Kaiju fans, he's a very famous poster artist who does a lot of great stuff. What's even weirder about Kamayatsu's cameo that we just saw, so he's dressed like a priest, and that is because around the time this movie came out, he played he starred in a TV show where he played a teacher who dressed like a priest, and that's kind of him as that character in that scene, which makes it even weirder. And I'd imagine for Japanese audiences seeing this in 1984, it must have been as jarring as, like, you know, when you're watching Scream 3 and Jay and Silent Bob show up out of nowhere. I was gonna say, it'd be like watching a Godzilla movie now and having, I don't know, like She-Hulk pop in for, you know, like, you'd be like, what the hell was that?
Merchandising, that's what that was.
Yeah. So this was actually the second Godzilla movie ever to be recorded in stereo sound, actually. King Kong versus Godzilla was the first. It's kind of an interesting little fun fact for you. It's wild to think.
Yeah, speaking of the cast, like Keiju Kobayashi, who plays the Prime Minister, he's in a couple movies. If you want to see more of him, he's in some of Kihachi Okamoto's movies. The two that I really like are Battle of Okinawa and Japan's Longest Day. Japan's Longest Day is about basically a group of Japanese military that people that basically are refuse to accept Japan's surrender, and they basically throw an insurrection and break into the government building. For us Americans, after January 6th, that movie hits different. I don't know if we mentioned Yoshifumi Tajima, but he's another Showa era Toho actor that pops up. He was the villain in Mothra vs. Godzilla.
Here's a great character that
This guy's the hero of the movie.
And this is another kind of cameo. This was he was a comedic actor in Japan, and here he is.
Yeah,
kind of being a
Tetsuya
goofball.
Takeda. He had like a 30-year role on a show called Kinpachi Sensei as like the main character. And I like his lines just a tick better in the American version.
You get more of them in this one, though.
I know, but I just something about his lines, like I get like you're just an out of towner, but I like when he don't act like such a big shot. You just got the town. Like that's a really good line. I really like later on when or is it earlier in this when he says like Tokyo in August, welcome Godzilla. Like that's a great line. And then like later on in the movie, he has a line where he's like, "Let's do lunch sometime," and I don't think that line is the same in the Japanese version.
I'll admit those scenes are a bit weird in a movie that's so serious, but I don't care. I love them.
I like a little bit of comedic kind of break the tension.
Yeah, there's levity that is probably needed at this point. Because, like I said, even as someone that really, really likes this movie, I mean, it is fairly dry. But Godzilla's like, what?
Now this is based off of an earlier script of the movie that had more in common with the 1954 version about like a secret weapon that would take Godzilla down, and there was going to be a similar, professor who creates the weapon has to sacrifice himself type of moment. And the idea of this homing beacon is kind of a remnant of that earlier version of the script of like a secret weapon that is used against Godzilla. It's a common theme in Godzilla as the enemy kind of movies, because the whole point of Godzilla really is that conventional weapons can't bring him down, so there has to be some sort of a unique sci-fi type of experimental thing, mankind outthinking the creature or whatever to take the monster down, because you can't just shoot a bunch of bombs at it. And that's one of the key ways in which a lot of Japanese takes on Godzilla differ from a lot of American takes on it, because we ultimately feel like our military firepower can defeat anything. So we, you see that even in the MonsterVerse movies, which are more faithful to the Japanese idea of Godzilla being stronger and more built like a brick house and like a tank and everything, that a lot of the military firepower does at least affect him more in those movies than it does in any of the Japanese movies. And some of that, I'm sure, is just a convention of the suits, right? Because the suits don't obviously react to bullets the way like you can get a CG creation to do, but it is just an interesting.
Well, let's not forget that the military has a very heavy hand in how they're portrayed in Hollywood.
Yes,
Also true.
We've talked a little bit already about the propaganda machine, right? So
yeah, the Super X, the first of three.
Yes, the Super X would wind up reappearing in the sequel to this movie, Godzilla vs. Biollante, as more of just a traditional, what they would call in Japan a mech, just a like more of a robot. There was no human component to it, and then it reappears in the final film of the Heisei era, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, and it has a very different design. It's more of a plane, the Super X3.
I think we just saw some more Submersion of Japan footage there, which, again, I would say people that like this should check out the Japanese version specifically of that movie. What's cool about those movies is you get to see the destruction scenes, but they aren't making, a franchise thing to sell toys. So, like, Submersion of Japan, you see people with, like, giant panes of glass, like, stuck in their heads, and pretty sweet.
Neat.
I like the Super X theme music.
Yeah, that's another, like, very recognizable theme, the Super X theme.
And yeah, this is the first movie, we've talked about it already, but this is the first movie that not only shows Godzilla feeding on nuclear radiation, but like treats the creature himself like a living nuclear reactor. They're firing cadmium laced missiles into his mouth to try to stop his nuclear reactor heart.
Just a quick shout out to the gunner. This guy's a hell of a shot.
It's the first Godzilla movie to take a lot of these concepts that people really consider to be part of the character now. And what is this, like the 16th Godzilla movie?
Yeah, right.
And we still haven't officially gotten to Godzilla being like a mutant yet in Toho movies,
Yeah, that'll come. That's 2 movies later.
Granted, Hayashida says this part of his brain is bird-like but mutated, but they don't quite push it to that point of he was a mutant dinosaur yet. They still are holding to that. What people don't really always realize is that Godzilla started as just he was irradiated, he was awoken by nuclear energy, but he wasn't originally thought of as being mutated by it or changed by it. He was just a 150-foot tall dinosaur that got radiation poisoning, essentially.
Should mention that this was one of Shinji Higuchi's very first jobs as a production assistant. He was also one on Sayonara Jupiter, but he co-directed Shin Godzilla, and he did the amazing effects direction on the Gamera trilogy. There's some cool behind-the-scenes photos also for this movie that you should be able to find pretty easily on Google if you ever want to see more of the sets and the crew. There's pictures of Rick Baker. The great Rick Baker, visited the set one day. So you had King Kong visiting the Godzilla set.
Nice.
Throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, there was a lot of the special effects artists of America and Japan and I'm sure London or England. I don't want to say London specific, but like England and Italy and like all visiting each other to try to sort of teach each other and learn from each other all the like little tricks of the trade, and so during those...
even into the 90s, I know Patrick Tatopoulos, who designed the 98 Godzilla. He visited the Gamera 3 set in 1999. That was after the Godzilla movie came.
Right, so they were just trying to learn from each other all the time back then. I mean, I'm sure
Tsuburaya was new George Pal, and him and George Pal would get together. And
this is an interesting one too, where do they say in the Japanese version like the missile got launched accidentally or something, but in the American version they're like a rogue nuclear missile or something like.
No offense to Raymond Burr, because I like Raymond Burr, and I think in the 85 version, I think he's quite good. He has a really great ending monologue that is really good, but I mean, as much as I like him and that character, like nothing in the extra footage adds anything. It's
not as well done as. It's not as well done as the original, the 54 film.
Not at all.
I think probably the only downside I would say to the Japanese version as opposed to the American version is there's that one. I'll just call him a moron, but he's the guy that's in the Pentagon who's working alongside like the general and alongside Burr, and he's like has no frame of reference for Godzilla at all. But he'll be like, "Oh yeah, we kicked that lizard's ass."
Yeah. And of course, all the American footage is like all about Dr. Pepper.
Yeah. Well, that was a big like ad campaign at the time.
Oh yeah,
Dr. Pepper had Godzilla commercials and stuff.
Yeah, those commercials they're pretty fun. They're on YouTube, but yeah, it's everywhere. And yeah, I mean, you could delete any of those American created characters, and the movie would be the same.
Yeah, that's in the 54 original film. For anyone who's never seen it out there, the 56 version, 1956, Godzilla King of the Monsters, which inserted Raymond Burr, did it in a much more narrative way. It had him sort of following the characters of the film around and being a reporter, and used a lot of really kind of unique little tricks, body doubles and stand-ins and things like that to try to make it look like he was actually involved and part of the movie and part of the plot. And in the 1985 version of this film, really they just insert Raymond Burr in the Pentagon just watching all of this from America on computer screen or TV screens. You know, it's really just a bunch of characters just telling us about the things that we are seeing happening and giving us like the American military perspective, just to then also have the one thing I do like about it then is it then also has at least Raymond Burr sort of throwing the American military arrogance back in their faces. You know, he constantly says tanks, bombs, missiles, these have all been tried before, and just because you've got bigger tanks and bigger bombs and better missiles doesn't mean it's going to work this time. And, you know, that stuff's all pretty good, but yeah, you could take it all out and it doesn't impact or change the actual plot of that version of the movie, really.
You know, we didn't mention Yasuko Sawaguchi as Naoko here, the young lady here. She was not really an experienced actress. She won one of Toho's Star Search contests.
Yeah, I think they called it like the Cinderella Search or something like that.
Yeah, and that was, you know, she was up and coming, and apparently they had to work very hard with her to try and have her hide her Kansai accent, which of course we wouldn't know as Americans very well, but I'm sure people
I don't know.
watching this movie in Japan could probably, you know, maybe she slips up in her accent or something.
Yeah.
And Shin Takuma here playing Okamura, who's being brought through the window here. He would show up later in Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla as the midlife crisis scientist.
That guy's awesome.
Did you know those were the same actor?
I don't think I did.
Yeah.
I love Sugar Daddy Scientist.
Next time you get a good look at his face, you can tell. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, this is like, you know, nearly almost 20 years before the Mechagodzilla movie. So yeah, he's a lot younger in this.
I love sugar daddy scientists from Godzilla.
Yeah, sugar daddy scientist. Yeah, the guy playing Okamura is sugar daddy scientist. This has been in when he was a strapping young lad.
I'm sure we have friends out there who heard me admit I didn't know it was the same actor that are probably very disappointed in me.
That you don't remember things.
Yeah. But yes, looking at his face,
yeah,
you
see him?
can tell.
Yep. Yeah. This is a pretty interesting scene because the whole conflict here is that there's too much turbulence for them to get in and out of the helicopter safely.
Which, if you've ever been, on top of or outside on like a tall building, the winds change completely. It can be completely calm on the ground, and up near these tall buildings, the wind could be whipping. It could be whipping in different directions. If you've ever worked in a tall skyscraper building on a windy day, the toilet water will be swishing around in the bowls a lot of times. I mean, it's an actual interesting kind of problem that they came up with, and I wonder how much of it was influenced by they did employ some actual scientists and engineers and things on this movie to sort of give them ideas of how buildings this size would actually collapse if they were to collapse.
So they put them to good use, unlike the scientists they hired for Rampage.
I was going to say, because a lot of the writing for this movie is really internally consistent in a lot of ways. And I'm just really happy that they put in the effort to make sure these types of things were accurate just for consistency's sake.
Yeah. And yes, it is not the way they made Rampage, where they hired a bunch of scientists and said, what would happen if we gave an alligator fake growth hormone or whatever, and then just made a monster anyway. I think coming up relatively soon, when Godzilla awakens, is the Toriyama cameo. I've seen screenshots of the moment itself, but I haven't noticed it just yet in the thing. He's just an extra running away from Godzilla.
It'd be hilarious if the whole reason you did this is because he has a cameo and you can't even point it out on a commentary.
Actually, that would be pretty on brand for us.
That'd be pretty on brand for Toriyama too, to be to do the cameo and be in it and everything, but also to never really show his face, because we've talked about it. Byrd, you probably haven't heard this necessarily, but the dude is a major hermit. He this movie actually is one of the last times for 30 years that he would appear in front of a camera at all. He just doesn't he wants to be as unrecognized as possible. He's talked multiple times about how he would move out even further into the country and just live in a hermit hut by himself if he could, because he still occasionally gets recognized by people.
That's awesome.
I can respect that.
I can absolutely respect that.
I know. I figured you'd like that. He's a kindred spirit. What a great acting moment right here by the Prime Minister too. The tension and the relief.
Yeah, I was about to say, literally watch the relief wash over him.
And then really cool matte paintings here with the sky. I miss matte paintings.
I was gonna say I miss because I mean not so much here, because it's a matte painting, but when you like right here, that's actually lit. There's lighting
lighting.
people
Not
that are
green
lighting
screen.
lighting the actors with red lights. Nowadays it would just be we'll throw some crap filter over it.
Yeah. This is where this character is explaining this to us in the American version. That the goofy Dr. Pepper guy explains to us that you get power outages from the EMP of a radioactive blast. And then Raymond Burr kind of sets him in his place with a son. When I was a kid, nuclear bombs went off all the time.
On the subject of nuclear bombs and stuff, to bring it back to reality a little bit, for people that are familiar with my podcast, one thing that we've talked about a few times with Shin Godzilla is the movie that movie, it's very much engineered to kind of inspire a sense of pride in Japanese and kind of making Japan look.
Here he is. He's in one of these. He's one of those people.
Oh, we blinked and we missed him, I guess.
Yes, our tenuous reference is intact.
But yeah,
so excited.
with Shin Godzilla, it was a movie that really put a lot of emphasis on Japan handling its problems and things like that, and a lot of it is in reaction to the Fukushima disaster with what happened there, and a lot of the oversights by the previous government administration that caused Fukushima to begin with, and so the movie is really slamming the previous administration for how that was handled and how the relief was handled and things like that, and rightfully so. It was absolutely disastrous. However, as Matt and I have talked about in our Shin Godzilla discussions on Kaiju Transmissions, there's more than enough blame to go around, and a lot of that blame falls on TEPCO, the energy company that, if you want to know more about Fukushima and what led to it, there's plenty of resources. But essentially, they knew that what happened, what ended up happening could end up happening, and basically didn't do anything. And one of my things with Shin Godzilla as being a legitimate criticism of, I guess, the 3/11 incident is that it never bothers to hold TEPCO, the corporation, responsible. The lack of preparation by TEPCO and basically the failings of, the capitalist trust in the government and capitalist trust in this corporation is what caused that disaster. And Shin Godzilla kind of doesn't acknowledge that piece of it, and because it's saying, trying to make Japan look good, basically. It's things that we do with our movies. This movie is also guilty of that. Japan had a very reasonable anxiety then, as they do now. And then it was being very much literally stuck in the middle of the Cold War and just the constant nuclear threat. But despite that, to bring it into reality a little bit, I have a passage here from a Time magazine article from 1981, June 8th, 1981, and I'm just going to read it instead of stammering over my own version of it. Since the 1950s, Japan's liberal democratic government has solemnly and repeatedly affirmed three basic principles about nuclear weapons: not to make them, possess them, or allow them into the country. In the 1960s, with the signing of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, Washington agreed not to introduce nuclear weapons into Japan. However, 2 weeks ago in 1981, former U.S. Ambassador to Japan Edwin Reischauer revealed that the two countries have ever since been living a convenient lie. In an interview with Tokyo's Mainichi Shimbun, Reischauer asserted that U.S. naval vessels carrying nuclear weapons who've routinely visited Japanese ports with Tokyo's tacit approval. So for this movie, with these guys, basically, the Soviets had nukes on our shores? No. How could they? In real life, Japan was allowing nuclear weapons in their waters.
Interesting.
For a long time. So again, that's just how. That's just the spin that this movie and Shin Godzilla. They're not necessarily rooted in reality as far as some of that perspective goes, and just like Americans, they may sweep over some of the narrative to make things look a little bit better than they are. So there's that.
Yeah, and to bring us to a kind of interesting sort of parallel between Godzilla and Dragon Ball, as the movie itself here is winding down a little bit. Godzilla 1984 comes out, and yes, the original series in Dragon Ball is still running, the Dragon Ball portion of Dragon Ball. But as this movie sort of kicks off what would be Godzilla's more serious, darker storytelling, and it's Heisei, the Heisei era, Dragon Ball does kind of do the same. Granted, it's a few years later. It's 1989, but that is when the sequel to this movie ultimately comes out. Dragon Ball becomes what ultimately is known as Dragon Ball Z, and here are these poor Super X2 operators.
That part's awesome.
This wasn't in the script. The special effects guys thought of this as how to destroy the Super X.
Godspeed.
I always felt pretty
Wonderful
bad
man.
for those guys.
Yeah, same.
That's a pretty rough way to go.
What a great shot right there, by the way. Godzilla all, lit in red. Yes, like Byrd said, with lighting, actually. Instead of just throwing like a red filter over the whole movie. But yeah, as Godzilla sort of shifts towards being more serious and darker and kind of taking itself more seriously and reinventing itself, so does Dragon Ball. This is when the Z portion starts, which is sort of I don't want to say abandoning, because it still has a lot of the humor and a lot of the fun and a lot of the brightness, but it shifts. We've talked about Dragon Ball having shifts a lot already. The first shift was away from it being like a journey sort of joke gag manga into being a more battle focused, and then it shifted from being this tournament thing to being the Red Ribbon Army, and then it kind of shifts towards being more Western culture inspired and stuff like that, and it shifts again obviously when the Z portion starts, and it makes Goku encounter these world-ending serious threats all the time. If you ever were watching the original run of Dragon Ball and said, I want to see Goku get every single bone in his body broken more often, maybe every episode, then the Z portion is for you. Because that's sort of an interesting, just kind of the two franchises hit that slightly more serious, slightly more adult oriented. I would even argue really more like teen oriented storytelling at the same time, kind of. They hit their stride with that and appealing to an older audience, right? But while still maintaining an appeal for kids as well.
Wonder if there was maybe some cultural reasons for that.
All these shots here in this moment with the giant foot prop that we see throughout here are all cut out of the American version. I don't really get that. I think it's a cool prop.
It was too good. Not enough Dr. Pepper jokes.
There you go. They couldn't figure out where to put the can.
That is quite.
It's, I guess it's not. It's hardly new, even in 1984, for Godzilla movies to do this. But they just introduced this element of he follows birds, and that's actually how they defeat him here. But it's just never brought up again, ever. Godzilla movies do stuff like that, though. He turns into a giant magnet for some reason in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla.
I wonder if there's any other examples of media that some of the hosts on the show might be familiar with that just forget aspects of the story for no reason.
Like maybe a character from Planet Namek forgets that he can grow giant until 40 years later.
Or maybe a character from Earth that just disappears after a certain part in the show and just is never talked about again.
Well, Lon shows up like once, I think, during the Cell Saga, being drunk at a bar, if I remember.
So is Earth? Is Earth like a thing in Dragon Ball? Is that?
Yeah, it's a fictionalized version. It's
fictionalized in that it makes Frieza the bad guy.
It follows this Chinese sort of storytelling called wuxia, which like has characters appearing in what's essentially China without ever calling it China, and then a lot of the other tropes of Dragon Ball are in it. But that's it. Yeah, Dragon Ball takes place on Earth, but a much more, Byrd, I've argued this on our show before, a much more Ishiro Honda-esque Earth where like there's one Earth government, and although it is the president of Earth is a dog,
which dogs really are just better than humans, so it makes sense.
That's fair.
But yeah, it's just like one Earth government, one Earth people. They approach problems as a society of humans on Earth and not like individual nations, which is probably something that, I mean, I wonder if that's a thing that might have pushed Honda away from this film as well, as this is a very, even though it's got a valid point to make in like how we shouldn't really, be on opposite sides of things here. He didn't even really like to portray that. He always liked to just have things be like UN resolutions and UN problems, and he had a very humanist view of things.
I see a lot of people get that kind of confused and saying like, well, Honda, he didn't have a realistic idea of it, but he knew the reality. He just wanted to portray a better one. Right.
Yeah, that's that whole thing of like artists who just want to have like some escapism,
Yeah.
I love that this bird lure works so well that Godzilla will walk right up to the very edge of a volcano without even questioning it.
He's an idiot. What do you expect?
I mean, yeah, he's a dumb dinosaur. I get that.
All right, we have some notes on Mount Mahara, don't we? Did we do that?
Yeah. Where did that go?
You don't know what your own notes are. That's great. I can read it for you.
Is that the bottom?
Oh yeah. So yeah, Mount Mahara does have cultural significance. Hey, culture. Cultural significance in Japan, as the island that it's on was previously designated as a place for banishing exiles, and in the early 1900s, this is horrible, by the way, the volcano became known as a prominent suicide spot, and they had to build a fence around the crater, the top
Caldera,
of the volcano.
I believe it's called.
The what?
The caldera.
Oh, maybe. They had to build a fence and have guards patrolling to prevent further death, as from 1931 to 1937, more than 2,000 people hurled themselves into the maw of the volcano. I am not a suicidal person, and I do not suffer from depression, but I can imagine thousands of better ways.
I mean, burned alive.
This also kind of answers my. Sorry, go ahead.
Japan has a really large suicide rate, so it doesn't surprise me too much.
It also kind of answers my question from earlier as to why it just walks up to the edge of the volcano.
If you're listening to if you end up watching this movie in the Japanese version or the American version, or both, really, and in that little part right there where Godzilla falls into the volcano, there's quite a bit of a difference in the audio editing. There's a high-pitched scream that's really kind of bone-chilling in the American version that really makes it seem like Godzilla is, at the last moment, kind of realizing what's happening and in pain and fear of what's happening, and that is not in the Japanese version at all. I prefer the American version
Light
of that.
correction, that was in the Japanese version when it played in theaters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for whatever reason, in the jump to home video, that just kind of got lost. But I'm not sure, why, but I do know that it did play.
And then in the American version also, as Godzilla is falling into the volcano, you get Raymond Burr's famous soliloquy, monologue, whatever you want to call it, from that version, which is, it's basically pontificating. It's one of those things that
it's verbalizing a lot of what the movie already tells you, but it's really good, but it's not necessary.
Right. It's one of those things.
I like it. I do like it a lot, though.
It's one of those things that in a modern movie would probably bother me, because it would probably be inserted somewhere in the middle of the movie, maybe even during
pointing out the obvious,
during like a climactic battle moment. Because it's basically just telling you as a viewer who likes Godzilla all the things that are cool about Godzilla that you want to hear. He's like a
nature
hurricane.
Has a way of reminding man how small he really is. Like, yeah, we know. I've seen Godzilla movies.
Yeah. But it is a cool monologue. This is the first end credits sequence in a Godzilla movie ever. Most of them, and it's true of a lot of movies in general throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, had their credits at the beginning of the movie.
Star Wars is the one that really popularized putting your credits at the end.
Yeah, and then at the end they would just have a card that would come up and say like the end. Da, 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 da.
Something cool about Raymond Burr is that New World, they initially really wanted the 85 version to be not just comedic, but a comedy, almost parody. And when they brought it to Raymond Burr, he said, I'm not going to do this unless you treat it seriously. And so then they had to go and be like, well, I guess we should, keep more of the tone of the Japanese version, because otherwise our big star isn't going to do the movie. He always took his role in Godzilla seriously, even though he was not part of the Japanese production side of anything. And he believed in the messaging of Godzilla, and he was really always kind of going to bat for Godzilla. And so when they said, "Hey, we're gonna redo this new Japanese Godzilla and make fun of it," he just said, "No, I'm not."
Good
Gotta
for him.
respect an artist that respects another artist's work.
And the last note I have is that for years this movie, the 85 version at least, was associated with a short by Marv Newland called Bambi Meets Godzilla. The theatrical screenings of the movie were preceded by the short, and I actually saw that like very few, if any, of the TV airings were preceded by it as well. But like I said, I had a taped off of TV because I know it was taped off of TV because at one point somebody who was taping it for me flipped through the channels, and I I had like a missing 30 seconds of the movie in the middle.
Now, do you still have that tape?
I probably do have it at my parents' house somewhere. But I had a tape of this that had that short in front of it, so it had to have been on like an HBO screening of it or something like that. And it's just how long is that short? Like 2 minutes, and
If that, yeah.
it's just Bambi eating some grass, and then Godzilla's foot steps on it. It's fun. It's cute. It's I have always associated it with this movie though because of that. It preceded my viewing of this movie every time.
Yeah, as long as I was watching the 85 version on VHS, it was always there.
Yep.
So that's Godzilla 1984, Godzilla 1985, The Return of Godzilla, whatever you want to call it. I personally like this movie quite a bit.
I do too. I like this movie quite a bit.
It's
weird it doesn't get talked about as much as it does, almost.
What?
I don't see a lot of people talking about it unless they're specifically talking about...
It's weird it doesn't get talked about as much as it does?
It's weird it doesn't get talked about as much as it should.
There you go.
It seems to only come up when people talk about examples of Godzilla movies that have done a darker tone or politically charged. I don't see as much discourse about it as I do some of the other movies.
Yeah.
As someone who's not quite as exposed to all things Godzilla, I didn't even know this movie existed until you guys suggested doing this.
So how did you register the differences with this version and the American version?
So as far as the writing goes, I very much prefer the Japanese version. It adds so much more nuance, complexity, more emotion. It like ticks all the boxes for things that I look for in a movie. The only thing that the American version I think did well was some of the extra characters that they added, even though they were, like we said, completely superfluous and really don't add anything to the movie. Some of them are just the way that they're portrayed, and the actors that did that job, I thought, did a wonderful job. Unfortunately, it does quite alter the tone of the original, and I much prefer the story of the original, honestly.
Yeah, what's the guy? I like the guy that's like it was golfing and he has like the towel around.
Yeah. Like,
He's still wearing his golf cleats.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some good moments, some good little character moments there, but yeah, they don't actually add anything to the narrative, which is a shame.
All right,
They
so
cashed that Dr. Pepper check, so
Yeah.
I don't know if we should hold our guests to our usual rating system. We usually rate things out of 7 Dragon Balls, because that's the thing with Dragon Ball.
It's a bit of cultural relevance for us.
But if I were going to rate this out of Dragon Balls, out of 7 Dragon Balls, I'd probably go with 5 out of 7.
That's what I was thinking.
That is weirdly also what I was thinking.
If I'm going to go with a star rating, it's like a solid 3.5. It might creep up to a 4, depending on my mood.
That's about where I am too. Like I really like this movie, and it fluctuates. Like every time I watch it, it might fluctuate a little bit between like a 3.5 and a 4.
I'm at a 3.5, but I think given everything we're facing in today's world, it hit a bit different doing this commentary today. So
well, it's sadly relevant still.
Yeah.
I think it was just this week I saw something about North Korea shooting missiles, towards Japan or something. I mean, it's still,
They're just cranky. They just need their feeding. That's all.
This was the first. This was the first Godzilla movie that was dubbed in Korean. Previous Godzilla movies had been screened in Japanese with Korean subtitles. So, what do you guys got going on over at Kaiju Transmissions this month for our listeners?
Well, it's
out there?
October, and for people that are familiar with us, we love October because we love horror, and we always really amp up our content flow, and we usually start going weekly in October, and we do kind of a horror-themed episode every week, which our recording schedule has taken quite a hit this month. Matt was sick and we had to delay 4 episodes, and then you got sick and we had to delay 4 episodes, and then on top of those, 3 episodes were delayed twice, and then on top of those there's still 2 more that we want to crank out by the end of the month. So our plans are going to be the same, but we're definitely going to be carrying our Halloween theme into November more than we normally would. We have a few movies that we'll be talking about that I'm really looking forward to. I don't know if I want to spoil it, but there's some that we have some really good movies that we'll talk about that are also going to be really good recommendations.
So yes, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to check out the Kaiju Transmission guys. They are always unearthing. It is called Kaiju Transmissions, but they are often unearthing just off the beaten path Japanese tokusatsu special effects, interesting sci-fi, horror, anything kind of in that vein. That if you've heard every Godzilla podcast review every Godzilla movie for the umpteenth time, and you're sick of that, check these guys out. They're always doing something a little bit, unique and different and off of that beaten path, which obviously translates to massive ratings.
Lots and lots of downloads by 12 people.
Do we really have room to talk in that regard?
But so yeah, for the rest of the month here, we will be doing, we've got one more mini-sode lined up. We got to get Bekinney lined out on his top 10 Dragon Ball designs. And then we will be doing our Don Dracula episode, where we'll be focusing in on that episode mostly on screenwriter Takao, I'm terrible at that, Koyama, who was the screenwriter for Don Dracula and also for many episodes of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. So we'll be talking about Don Dracula, but we're going to be digging into that guy. I have a whole bunch of information and really interesting stuff I found out about him and how he sort of revolutionized a lot of screenwriting in Japan. So that'll be the focus of our Don Dracula episode, and that'll round us out for Dragon Ball-oween, where we're just taking a little bit of a fun break from our usual format.
Gotta keep it fresh.
Anyone else have anything else that they would like to add?
Well, for fans of your show, I should mention that you're usually on all our October episodes, in case that didn't come across.
Yes, I take up residence in the KT studios in October.
we have a lot of free time in our expeditions through space, just the two of us.
Yeah. What will Bekinney's top 10 designs of all time be? What will we say about Don Dracula? Spoiler alert, it's not very good.
Oh, damn.
Find out next time and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.